Before we get into today's story, take a second to subscribe. We share real, emotional stories about trust, betrayal, and the things that break people from the inside. If that's the kind of truth you value, you're in the right place.
My name is María Fernanda Ruiz, but the first time they called it at work, it came out flat and unfinished, the accent left behind like luggage too heavy to carry. Maria, they said. The sound clipped, soft edges turned to stone, and though my tongue itched to correct them, the words stuck somewhere deep in my chest. At first, I let it happen. After all, wasn't I lucky to be here? The first in my family to trade my father's worn work boots and my mother's plastic cleaning gloves for borrowed heels that pinched my toes raw. The first to sit in an office where the hum of air conditioning and the smell of fresh ground coffee blended into an invisible promise. You belong if you behave. And so, for a time, I behaved. I remember that first morning clearer than most memories. The mirror in my tiny apartment catching my reflection in the harsh yellow bulb light, showing the nerves that buzzed under my skin like live wires. I ironed my cream blouse 3 times until every wrinkle surrendered, fastened my abuela's gold necklace, a thin chain that had survived the crossing from Mexico, a small circle that gleamed softly against my collarbone, and smoothed my hair until it lay flat and obedient. My father's hand had rested briefly on my shoulder before I left, his thumb brushing the chain as if in blessing. "Estamos orgullosos, mija," he murmured. "We're proud of you, my child." His words felt warm enough to carry with me through the cold morning air and the silent elevator ride up 32 floors. When HR welcomed me, the manager smiled a polite, distant smile that never reached her eyes. "Welcome aboard, Maria," she said. "It's Maria," I corrected, voice soft, almost unsure, and she nodded, the sound of my name already slipping away from her mouth like water through cupped hands. I swallowed, telling myself it was small, this missing accent. Smaller than what my parents had endured. My father's skin darkened by sun and tar, his muscles corded from carrying buckets of hot roofing gravel-up ladders that trembled under summer winds. My mother's wrists swollen from wringing out mops in offices that smelled of lemon disinfectant and loneliness. Compared to that, what was one letter? But the weight of small things is that they pile up until you can't breathe. My first weeks passed in a blur of bright screens, unfamiliar jargon, and smiles that felt stretched too tight. Every morning, I'd squeeze into the crowded train, hands gripping the cold steel pole, heart hammering as I rehearsed how to say good morning, in a voice neither too soft nor too sharp. The office itself felt like another country, voices crisp and confident, laughter ringing down glass-walled hallways, the hum of ambition rising and falling like a tide I couldn't quite enter. The first time I spoke in a meeting, my voice emerged small and careful, syllables placed like fragile china on a crowded table. No one looked at me, and my words slid unnoticed into silence. I wanted to vanish into the carpet. At lunch, the difference felt sharper. They spoke of beach houses, skiing trips, dinners at restaurants whose menus I'd never seen and whose prices would have covered my parents' monthly groceries. I smiled, nodded, offered polite comments, but never mentioned my weekends spent helping my mother bleach the grout lines in a stranger's bathroom, the ache in my back, or the burn of chemicals that clung to my hair long after the water washed over me. Instead, I hid my lunch, arroz con pollo, still warm in its glass container, behind a napkin, pretending it was something store-bought and bland. The smell reminded me of home, garlic, cumin, the sweetness of slow-cooked peppers, the sound of my mother humming softly over the stove. Here, it felt like a secret too delicate to share. Sometimes, I'd catch my reflection in the black screen of my monitor. A young woman with tired eyes, hair pulled back too tightly, lips bare of color. At night, brushing my teeth, I'd see the same reflection and wonder if this was the price of success. To trade the music of my name, the color of my lips, the curl of my hair, for the safety of blending in. But safety was always an illusion. It wasn't always cruel, not at first. It was laughter that didn't quite include me, inside jokes I never understood, birthday cards that skipped my desk. And then, little by little, it sharpened. Maria, Bring some of that Latina spice to the brainstorm, Tom would say, grinning wide enough to show every tooth. The room would chuckle, glances bouncing off me like pebbles skimming water. You're lucky, someone murmured once. Everyone loves a little diversity these days. And I laughed too, a thin sound that scraped my throat, because what else could I do? My parents had taught me gratitude first, pride second. At night, lying in the darkness of my small apartment, I'd replay those moments over and over, as if by examining them from every angle I could find the right response, the right version of myself who could have spoken up. But always, my imagined voice failed me, and I'd fall asleep ashamed and exhausted. Childhood memories surfaced in those sleepless hours. My mother's stories of growing up in a village where water was carried in clay jars balanced on hips, of nights spent by candlelight, of walking barefoot across dusty roads to school. My father's stories were shorter, rougher around the edges, shaped by years of silence. He had crossed the border with hope clutched so tightly it left bruises on his palms, hope that hardened into calluses as he built a life for us one brick, one paycheck at a time. They'd given me everything. Saturday mornings spent at the library learning to pronounce words they couldn't read, evenings practicing spelling bees while my father struggled with English so new it tasted foreign on his tongue. I was supposed to be their proof that sacrifice bore fruit. But most days, I felt like a fruit left unripe, sour under the skin. I remember one Sunday dinner when my father noticed how quiet I'd become. His gaze held questions he didn't have words to ask. My mother spoke instead, voice gentle. "To do bien mija?" I nodded, a practiced lie. Because how could I explain that every day felt like being gently erased, that the pride they'd poured into me felt worn thin at the edges, that I couldn't bear to disappoint them by showing them the cracks? And so, each morning, I'd iron my blouse, flatten my hair, paint a careful smile across my face. At work, I tried harder, arrived earlier, left later, answered emails before dawn, took on tasks others refused. "You're such a team player, Maria," my manager would say, his praise warm but shallow, skimming over the truth that my silence was part of the bargain. And always Maria, never Maria. I began to wonder if they even heard the difference, or if it had been invisible from the start. But the difference wasn't invisible to me. Each time they stripped the accent from my name, it felt like a small theft. Of my grandmother's songs, of my mother's whispered prayers, of my father's quiet pride. Yet still, I stayed silent, telling myself the price was worth it. Until it wasn't. The day it happened, the sky outside the office was a dull, indifferent gray, and the air smelled faintly of burnt coffee from the break room. We gathered around the glossy conference table, the cold glass reflecting our faces back at us like strangers. I had rehearsed my idea all morning, mouthing the words silently at my desk, smoothing each syllable so it wouldn't catch on my accent. My heart thudded loud enough to drown out Tom's small talk. When my turn came, I spoke, a concept drawn from childhood markets where color and language tangled together in a melody of belonging. My voice trembled, but the idea felt solid under it. And then Tom leaned back, smirked, and repeated my words in a twisted mockery of my accent, drawing each syllable out until it sounded foreign, ridiculous, wrong. The laughter that followed felt endless, bouncing off the glass walls, sharp as broken glass. My manager chuckled too, waving a dismissive hand. "Relax, Maria," he said, as if the pain blooming in my chest were an overreaction. In that moment, shame and rage collided so fiercely it left me breathless. I excused myself, legs numb, stumbling into the hallway and then into the women's bathroom. The door clicked shut behind me, muffling the office noise to a distant murmur. The mirror showed my reflection, cheeks burning, eyes wet, breath ragged. My palms pressed against the cold porcelain of the sink until they ached. For the first time, the silence felt heavier than my fear. My mother's voice echoed in my mind, soft but insistent. "Mija, tu voz importa. Your voice matters." And behind it, my father's words, roughened by years of work. "Nunca dejes que te even menos." Never let them see you as less. My heart pounded, so hard it felt like it might bruise my ribs. Fear whispered that speaking up would cost me everything: my job, my carefully built place at the table, my right to belong. But something deeper, older than fear, answered. And what if silence costs more? That night, back at my desk long after the laughter had faded and the office had emptied, I opened a blank email. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling, breath shallow. The words came slowly, heavy as stones: harassment, mockery, hostile environment. Each letter felt like it weighed a lifetime. I read them over and over, doubt whispering at the edges. But finally, with my heart lodged somewhere in my throat, I clicked send. In the quiet hum of the late office, I realized I was shaking. But for the first time in a long time, it wasn't from shame. The night I sent that email, sleep hovered at the edges of my consciousness, but refused to come close, like a stray dog too wary to trust an outstretched hand. I lay awake on the narrow mattress, the hum of the refrigerator in the next room ticking like a clock, counting down the hours until morning. The apartment felt smaller than ever, walls pressing in, the ceiling low enough to feel oppressive. Outside, the city breathed in low, mechanical sighs. Traffic far below, distant laughter spilling from bars, the clink of bottles rolling on concrete. My heart wouldn't slow. Fear had moved from a shadow in my chest to a living thing perched on my ribcage, whispering, "What have you done?" I thought of my parents, asleep across town in their small rented house. My mother's hands folded over her chest, her breathing slow, my father's soft snores, the rhythm of a man who had worked himself past exhaustion his whole life. They had built everything with calloused hands and quiet prayers, and now their daughter had invited trouble into the one place she was supposed to be safe. Guilt gnawed at the corners of my resolve, but when I closed my eyes, I saw Tom's smirk, the curl of mockery around his mouth, the room rippling with laughter while my face burned. I remembered my own silence, how it tasted like metal on my tongue. I couldn't take that moment back, but maybe I could refuse to let it happen again. The morning after, the elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt longer than ever. My stomach roiled, and I tasted bile at the back of my throat. When the door slid open, every footstep sounded loud. Each fluorescent light seemed too bright. The open floor plan that once felt modern now felt like a stage. Eyes flickered in my direction and away again, like moths startled by sudden movement. Conversations that used to murmur politely stopped, trailed into silence when I passed. Some people stared at their screens with such intensity it felt forced. Others let their gaze linger, quickly replaced by an awkward smile when I caught them. My desk felt different too. The same chair, the same worn keyboard, but as I sat down, it felt as though I had stepped over an invisible line. Tom passed by on his way to the break room, head lowered, a shuffle in his walk that hadn't been there before. Ethan, who once stopped by my desk to joke or share weekend plans, kept his distance, shoulders tight with discomfort. At lunch, the circle at the far table tightened subtly, leaving no space. I didn't try to force it. Instead, I opened the glass container of arroz con pollo my mother had packed. For the first time in months, I didn't hide the smell beneath a napkin. The investigation unfolded like a shadow stretching across days. HR called Tom in, then Ethan, then the manager, each emerging from closed doors with faces clouded in unreadable expressions. Some afternoons, I caught Tom glancing toward my desk, jaw set, but he never spoke. Ethan's easy friendliness hardened into brittle politeness. He avoided eye contact, fingers drumming restlessly against his chair. The manager, who had once chuckled at Tom's imitation, kept conversations short and voice-clipped. The air itself seemed charged, brittle as ice about to crack. But in the quiet, other voices reached me. Maya, who sat 2 desks over, left a small sticky note on my keyboard, its neat handwriting curling slightly at the edges. "Thank you for saying something." My eyes blurred as I read it. At lunch, she hesitated at my table, tray balanced uncertainly. "They did it to me too," she whispered, voice almost inaudible under the hum of conversation. "I didn't. I couldn't." Her words cracked, raw at the end. I wanted to hug her, to tell her she wasn't alone, but instead, I squeezed her hand, both of ours shaking. A junior analyst, Sophia, messaged me late one night. "You made me feel braver." Each message felt small, but together, they stitched warmth back into the cold. Some days felt heavier than others. Walking past the conference room where it had happened, my throat tightened until breathing felt like swallowing glass. I replayed that meeting in my head over and over. Tom's smirk, the laughter, my own frozen silence. Guilt coiled in my chest, asking, "Why didn't you speak then?" But the memory of that laughter had rooted too deeply to be erased by regret. Nights blurred into each other. At home, my mother noticed the deepening circles under my eyes, the way my shoulders hunched inward. One evening, as I picked at my dinner, she placed her hand over mine, warm and small, her thumb brushing lightly as if to soothe a fever. "Mija," she said softly, "you are enough. Tu voz importa." Your voice matters. I swallowed hard, words tingling behind my teeth. My father, sitting quietly beside us, only nodded, eyes dark and steady, carrying years of unspoken faith. The day HR called me back felt strangely anticlimactic. The small room smelled of cold coffee and dry erase markers. The HR manager's face was careful, the folder closed neatly before her. "We've concluded the investigation," she said, voice measured. "There were breaches of conduct. Tom will undergo training, and your manager will face disciplinary action." The words landed with a muted thud. Part of me had expected what? A grand apology? A sweeping change? Instead, it felt both too little and somehow enough. Tom's apology came the next morning, his voice low, eyes fixed somewhere near my shoulder. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, words sliding out quickly, a reflex more than an admission. I stared at him. Anger and exhaustion knotted in my chest. I wanted to demand sincerity, to drag real regret out of him like splinters, but instead I only managed, "Don't do it to anyone else." His nod was small, almost imperceptible. The office atmosphere shifted in ways that felt both subtle and immense. The easy jokes died out, laughter growing careful, measured. In meetings when I spoke, people listened, not always agreeing but no longer mocking. The first time my voice cracked mid-sentence, I kept going, cheeks hot, palms damp, heart galloping. No one laughed. Each time afterward, the tremor faded a little more, leaving something steadier in its place. Yet, not everything healed. Ethan's warmth never returned fully. His jokes stopped, replaced by stiff courtesy. Some teammates whispered behind the walls of glass conference rooms, eyes flicking toward me and away. The fear never disappeared completely. It curled quietly in my stomach, reminding me how quickly laughter could turn sharp. But each morning, I woke, dressed, and stepped back into the space I had reclaimed. Small acts of rebellion began to bloom. Wearing my red lipstick again, the color bold against my skin, letting my hair curl naturally, dark waves defying the flat lines I had forced it into. One morning, when a new hire mispronounced my name, I gently corrected her. "It's Maria," with the accent. The words felt heavy at first, but when she nodded and repeated it, something bright unfolded in my chest. One Friday, I brought tamales my mother had made, wrapped in corn husks still fragrant with masa and chili. I placed them on the communal table, pulse racing under my skin. Maya tried one, eyes widening. "These are amazing," she said, and the words landed softly, without mockery. For the first time, the food that tasted like home felt like a gift, not a secret. In moments alone at my desk, I'd think of the women who had shaped me. My grandmother, who sang lullabies under a roof patched with tin. My mother, who crossed borders she couldn't see, cleaning offices that sparkled by dawn. The girl I had once been, reciting spelling words by candlelight. I realized my voice wasn't just mine. It carried their prayers, their sweat, the lullabies that hummed in my blood. Speaking up had felt like betrayal once. Now, it felt like fulfillment. I began noticing others, too. Sophia, correcting a senior analyst who kept shortening her name. Maya, offering ideas in meetings with a voice no longer pitched to vanish. Each small act echoed outward, quiet but unmistakable. At home, the difference showed in ways I didn't have words for. My father's hand lingered on my shoulder longer. My mother's gaze held something proud and relieved. At dinner, they didn't ask for details, but they listened to what I didn't say. One evening, walking home past glass buildings catching the sunset, I caught my reflection in a shop window, hair loose around my face, lipstick bold, posture no longer bent inward. My name whispered itself in my mind, full and uncut. María Fernanda Ruiz. For the first time in a long time, it sounded complete. In the end, I hadn't burned the place down or forced a revolution. I hadn't stopped the whispers completely or erased every fear. But I had spoken. And each day, that voice felt less like borrowed courage and more like my own. They had tried to trim my name to fit their comfort, to laugh my history out of the room. But they had failed. Because my name, the one my mother chose, the one my grandmother had whispered to the saints, had survived border crossings, empty pantries, and silent prayers. It could survive this too. And so could I. The seasons changed quietly outside the office windows, trees shedding their leaves like old regrets while the city moved forward, indifferent to my small victories. But something had shifted within me, invisible and permanent. What began as survival became transformation. Not loud or dramatic, not all at once, but steady. The way rivers shape stone or light creeps into locked rooms. I wasn't the same woman who had first stepped into this building wearing borrowed heels and a blouse ironed until it lost its soul. That version of me had whispered her name like a question. Now I carried it like a flag. There were still moments of silence, of course. Still colleagues who stiffened when I entered the room, or who smiled too tightly, as if politeness could erase what they'd ignored. Tom stayed quiet, more polite than before but distant, like someone carefully stepping around glass. My manager had become less dismissive, more measured, yet I could still feel him double-checking his tone when addressing me. No one said it, but I knew they remembered, not just what had happened, but that I had done something about it. And that memory, lingering in corners like incense smoke, gave my presence weight. I began to understand power not as control, not as position or title, but as presence. I didn't need a promotion to make a difference. I only needed to be exactly who I was out loud. For so long, I'd been told that fitting in was the goal, that smoothing over my edges, trading my name for something palatable, was the price of admission. But what if the door I was trying to walk through was never built for someone like me? What if I had to build my own? A few months after the HR resolution, our company held a diversity and inclusion town hall. It was exactly what you'd expect: buzzwords and buzz cuts, PowerPoints in soothing gradients, everyone carefully tiptoeing around real discomfort. At one point, the moderator, a white woman with a bright smile and too perfect posture, opened the floor for personal insights. Silence stretched. Then Maya nudged my elbow. "Say something," she whispered. My stomach twisted, but I stood up, palms damp and heartbeat wild. I told them what had happened, not in graphic detail, but in undeniable truth. I spoke of invisibility and erasure, of names mispronounced and voices ignored, of laughter that wounds and silence that protects it. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. I spoke for myself, but not just for myself. I felt the weight of every woman who had hidden her lunch, changed her name, straightened her hair, or bitten back a correction to survive. When I finished, the room was still. Then came a ripple of applause, polite, of course, but behind it, something warmer: respect, recognition. Later, 2 interns found me by the elevators. One had tears in her eyes. "That was the first time I felt seen here," she said. Her voice shook. "Thank you." I wanted to hug her. Instead, I smiled and said, "Say your name." Every time. That became my mantra. Say your name. Every time. I started a small mentorship group, unofficial at first. Just 3 women of color, me, Maya, and Sophia, meeting over lunch once a week to talk, vent, dream. But word spread. Within a month, we were 8. By spring, 15. We called it La Mesa, the table, because we were done waiting to be invited to theirs. We brought tamales, biryani, jollof rice, homemade dumplings, and unfiltered honesty. It wasn't formal, but it was real. We talked about asking for raises, about performance anxiety, about that look your boss gives when you speak with emotion in your voice. We shared stories, strategies, resumes, and sometimes just silence, when that's what was needed. One afternoon, Maya shared that she had finally corrected someone on her name for the first time in 2 years. I told them it's Maya, not Maya, and they blinked like I'd spoken in tongues. We all laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. It was around then that a new hire, a Latina named Luz, joined our department. She was bright, fast, and carried herself with that same mixture of pride and apprehension I recognized in my own reflection a year ago. The first time she introduced herself in a meeting, the manager squinted and asked, "Lucy?" She smiled tightly and nodded. Later, I found her by the printer. "What's your name?" I asked. She blinked. "Luz." "Say it again," I said. "Luz," she repeated, slower, surer. "Good," I told her. "Say it like it's carved in stone." She smiled, and something in her shoulders uncurled. I began to notice the echoes everywhere, in how women paused before speaking, in the way colleagues hesitated at difficult names, in how the office rearranged itself invisibly around what it considered normal. We didn't change everything, not overnight. But we chipped at it, bit by bit, like sculptors carving dignity from concrete. At home, my parents didn't ask much about work, not out of disinterest but reverence. They trusted that I was building something none of us had seen before. My mother had gone from worrying whether I'd get fired to packing my lunch with pride, adding extra for the girls in your group. My father, once skeptical of confrontation, now looked at me with a quiet awe I didn't quite know how to carry. "You are brave," he said one evening, eyes shining. "And you are still kind. That is power." In time, I was invited to join the formal mentorship council. HR, perhaps out of guilt or strategy, now asked for my insights. They wanted authentic voices for their newsletters, panels, policy reviews. It was tempting to scoff, to question the sincerity, but I reminded myself, progress often comes wrapped in performance. If they were finally ready to listen, I would speak, not for them, but for us. I began writing, too. Personal essays. Speeches. A short piece titled "The Tilde I Refuse to Lose" went modestly viral on LinkedIn. I received messages from women in 3 continents who had stories like mine. The words that had once trembled on my lips now moved through screens and pages, reaching people I'd never meet. I still had bad days. Days when my voice shook, when a subtle eye roll sent me spiraling, when exhaustion made me question if anything had really changed. But those days didn't define me. I remembered who I was and who I came from. One Saturday morning, I took the train to my old neighborhood, walked past the bakery where my mother used to buy pan dulce, past the corner where my father waited for work crews. I carried a stack of papers, resumes, tips, lists of scholarships and programs, and met with a group of first-gen college hopefuls at the community center. "How many of you have ever felt like you didn't belong?" I asked. Every hand rose. "Good," I said. "That means you're in the right room." Belonging doesn't come from permission. It comes from planting your name like a seed and letting it grow roots. At the end, a girl with nervous eyes approached me. "I want to be like you," she said. My throat caught. I knelt beside her. "Be better," I whispered. The echo of my name, the real one, now followed me everywhere. Maria. It rang in Zoom meetings, appeared in email signatures with the accent sharp and unapologetic. It was printed on my badge, finally corrected after months of nudging. It shimmered on speaking panels and mentorship flyers. But more than that, it lived in the way I walked into rooms now. Not small, not unsure, not waiting to be invited. They had once tried to cut my name down, to reshape it into something easier to swallow. They had laughed my voice into corners. But I had reclaimed both, not with rage alone, but with persistence, community, and truth. The workplace hadn't become perfect. Bias didn't vanish like fog in sunlight. But now, when someone mocked, others spoke. When someone was silenced, someone else amplified. When someone whispered their name, another helped them say it louder. And me? I stayed. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. Because my staying meant another Maria wouldn't have to start from silence. Because when I stood tall, I brought my ancestors with me. The women who scrubbed floors, who carried water, who crossed borders with songs in their mouths and stars in their eyes. Because my name still echoed. Because I was still here.
Thanks for watching. If the story meant something to you, consider subscribing. We've got more like this, stories that don't ask for sympathy, just honesty.